Turning your passion into seven-figure business. Here in this video I will tell you about successful startup of two brothers. They earned in million. Simply what they did was turn your passion, motivation into a business. Hit the red bell icon and subscribe to Knowledge Builder. This interview is being conducted by Sarah and Saad. Start your own business. Good luck. The two brothers turned their love and passion for biking into a business by launching State Bicycle Company. From biking enthusiasts to business owners. Sarah, so you've always had a lifelong passion for bikes. What made you decide to funnel that passion into a business? Mehdi, myself and the co-founder here, Reza, my brother, grew up around bikes, cycling. It was just something that we were exposed to as kids like everyone else, just riding bikes around. But then as we got older, we became fans of the sport. Lucky enough to travel to France and watch Lance Armstrong in his prime win the Tour de France. We spent a couple of summers in Europe watching bike racing, and it's just something that we loved. Right around 2008 we started noticing a lot of our friends were riding fixed-gear bikes, and in the process of wanting to get those styled bikes that were really simple, cool, customizable, fun projects to work on, we realized there wasn't really a lot of options, and the options that were there were not affordable. So we went down the path and a rabbit hole of figuring out how we could start building our own bikes and eventually starting a business. Sarah, did you both have experience starting businesses in the past? Mehdi, it was not the first business. Both he and I started a business. We're just really entrepreneurial by spirit. We initially were doing just printing t-shirts. A lot of people I feel like to get their first business experience printing and selling t-shirts. That evolved into importing and selling the equipment to print t-shirts. We found that was more lucrative than actually printing the shirts ourselves, so we got into the machinery, basically enabling other people who were starting out and wanting to start their own business to get the equipment. That's what that business evolved into. Prior to starting the bike business, we were importing mid-century style furniture. That business actually was pretty successful right out of the gate. I think we grossed $1 million in our first year of business, which we were 23 at the time, and that was phenomenal. We were really excited about that. We really started the bike business as a side project, as a passion project. Sarah, can you share some of those things, some of the biggest lessons that you learned from each business that helped you get things off the ground sooner for subsequent businesses? Mehdi, I'm sure there are dozens of lessons that I've learned from each experience, and we're still learning. But from the t-shirt printing business, I would think that we learned to be really dynamic. That was our first experience with any type of online business, and most of the sales were through eBay at that time, which was the most predominant third-party platform. This predates Amazon's Pinnacle by many, many years. So we were selling shirts on that. We were just really moving quickly. If some kind of topical thing happened in politics or sports, we would make those types of shirts and just learn to be really flexible and adapt to situations, so we could capitalize on whatever was hot at the moment, whatever was currently relevant. Moving on to the t-shirt printing business, obviously, now we're dealing with more t-shirt printing equipment business, I should say. Now we're dealing with a much higher price point product. It's not a $20 t-shirt. We're talking about equipment that is sometimes in the thousands of dollars, and these are customers that rely on that equipment to really power their business, so they can't afford for something to go wrong with that equipment or any delays when they place an order. They might need that equipment right away because they're going to an event, etc. With that type of business, really, I think the big takeaway was really focusing on quality control, especially when you're selling a product that people rely on for their livelihood. The quality and reliability of whatever you're selling need to be top-notch. Sarah, what are some ways that you are able to do quality control on the products that you're selling? Mehdi, so on this particular product we did have some hard lessons. When we were selling the equipment, we were importing and very inexperienced at that time. Just fresh out of college. We were going with vendors that maybe we didn't vet as well as we wanted. There were delays in the product, and then what type of service and support they provided to us after the fact was really not well investigated. We were just moving quickly in order to start a business without doing great due diligence. That's a lesson, I think, that we've learned and been able to carry over into our current business, State Bicycle Company, where the quality of a bicycle, it's moving. People use it for transportation. They need something reliable, and that's a lesson we learned 7, 8 years prior to making sure that before we release any product, everything is really well tested, backed by a great warranty, and our suppliers understand what kind of quality we're demanding. Quality and its importance for building credibility. Sarah, when it comes to quality control, is this something that you define as what is the quality? Mehdi, with our bicycles, everything is gone through a pretty rigorous testing protocol, and that's through the factory, directly overseas, and also before any product is released it is tested here. So we work with a variety of riders. Depending on the product, we might be working with engineers in order to not only design but also test in real-life conditions to troubleshoot any particular pain points that might be going on. It really is by a variety of methods that we use, but the testing is rigorous, and that's why sometimes it might take us 2 years to release a new bike just because of all the different series of testing, test riding afterward, and then later on if we do notice that something needs to be changed, going back and testing and retesting. That's where we're at with the bikes. Sarah, what gave you an accelerated path toward success when you started State Bicycle Company? Mehdi, we did have a background in importing, and with the way that the bicycle industry is, most of the manufacturing is done overseas. So being able to navigate supply chains, whether that would be in Taiwan or China, we do use both here at State Bicycle Company. That was really, really crucial. Having that experience was great, but then just on the marketing side of things, all of the other businesses I mentioned were online businesses as well, so knowing some do's and don'ts, learning what kind of revenue is good revenue, what kind of revenue is bad revenue. With the furniture business I mentioned, we were doing $1 million per year right out of the gate, but there were times where our advertising budget was not in a great place to where we were spending money and losing money many months because just the customer acquisition cost was high. Sarah, State Bicycle Company started as a passion project. When did you guys start taking it more seriously? Mehdi, we got our first batch of bikes in March 2010. It was 140 bikes. At this point we had decided we were going to move forward and start selling these bikes. It was just a response to how quickly we're able to sell them, the enthusiasm we were getting from the local community around Tempe when people would see our bikes, inquire about them, and just how interested people were in the product. That first set of 140 bikes sold out very quickly, and at that point, I think we realized that this could be a really viable business and also something that we could really enjoy. So we kept reinvesting in getting more bikes and again repeated the process. They were selling out. We were building a website, and every shipment dedicates more and more resources to it to the point where we realized we should be doing this full time. I would say about 1.5 years, 2 years in was when we ultimately phased out of the furniture business. Saad, how were you selling those in the initial run of bikes that you guys purchased? Mehdi, right out of the gate it was eBay, Craigslist, word of mouth. It was friends and family. These are the people that helped and supported us. Most of it locally. We weren't really shipping because we hadn't even built out a website for it. That was the initial push, and then it became a website. Also, message boards. There's a ton of fixed gear and bike message boards that we'd go on and, hey, we are coming out with this bike. Here are the details. Send those PayPal if you want something. Yeah, it was just hustling and selling bikes in any way possible to just get it off the ground. Saad, what was the goal of selling those bicycles? Mehdi, I think we were just curious to see if this was a viable revenue source on the side of everything else we were doing. I think the initial idea was like, hey, we're making a decent living selling furniture, but let's supplement our income selling bikes and see how it goes. But we didn't necessarily foresee it being a full-fledged company, I think, until several months or even years after the initial batch. Saad, how did you get people to give you guys a shot and purchase your bicycles? Mehdi, initially, it was difficult. The first batch of bikes was purposely unbranded just because we didn't want to put a logo on there that people they didn't know or maybe they didn't trust. We really tried to translate our quality and our details through what we like to call visual communication, which is basically photos and videos. I think our attention to detail on those particular methods of communication translated really well for people, and they understood that, hey, this bike looks great. It's checking all the boxes in terms of specs that similar bikes might be, but the price is really good. Maybe half the price of a normal one. We'll go ahead and try it. But you're right. We didn't have a brand name. We were relatively unproven. I mentioned forums, Reddit, message boards. There were a lot of people that were questioning us and questioning the quality, so just being able to, as an owner, go on and talk directly to customers and answer any hesitations or any questions that people had, and being really active. I wouldn't even let one comment on a social media post or one comment question on eBay, whatever it be. Nothing went unanswered. Being really active and really transparent, I think, was really critical. And then the second thing, which we actually did pretty early on, was in 2011 we connected with a couple of local riders here who were really active in the fixed gear scene and really talented racers, and we sponsored these guys, so they were riding our bikes. At that time, there was a big race in Los Angeles, and it coincided with the LA Marathon, which is right around St. Patrick's Day in March every year. These guys are called the Wolfpack Hustle. The night before the marathon at 2 a.m., while all the streets in LA are closed for 26 miles, they're setting up the barricades for the marathon early the next morning. They would throw a bike race and crash that course, and you would get 3,000 riders out at this on fixed gear bikes just doing this illegal street race at 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was great. You could ride your bike in LA, no traffic, barricaded streets. We went there in 2011 and basically relatively unheard of, maybe outside of Tempe, and we took first, second and third place that year, which everyone was just like, who are these guys? And I think that was another way that put us on the map, because at that point you can't really knock the product. We swept the podium with an unknown bike brand, and I think we started seeing a lot of momentum after that. For this type of product, any type of endorsement, obviously influencers, ambassadors, people that are out and using the product, and showing the performance, improving the performance, I think that can be really critical for this type of product and for probably a lot of other products too. Saad, is this still a strategy you take today to sponsor athletes? Mehdi, actually, to this day, one of those 3 guys is still on our team 10 years later. He turns out he's one of my best friends. We use him in a ton of content and video marketing still. We have a team of 9 male and female riders, and we do anywhere from 6 to 12 races around every year around the country, around the world. That's definitely a part of our strategy. Not every single one of our customers is necessarily a racer, and not every single one of our customers is necessarily interested in racing style bikes, but having that as something that appeals to a certain customer is certainly something that we value. It lends a bit of a face to the brand as well, our race team does. If you are liking this interview of successful startup, please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel. Saad, how do these partnerships and collaborations come about? Mehdi, there's a number of different ways. And this might be kind of like giving advice. For someone who's just starting out trying to go and get that big collaboration with your favorite sports team or your favorite Disney character or whatever it maybe might be a little bit daunting. But the first ones we did were really organic and really like, hey, I follow on up and coming clothing brands on Instagram and we exchange information, and I realized your customers and my customers probably are about the same people. There's a lot of overlap here. Let's do a fun project. And it can be something as simple as that. The Wu-Tang Bike Project, believe it or not, I was walking a bike through Agenda, the streetwear trade show. It was a black and gold bike, and I got tapped on the shoulder by Power, who was one of the original producers of Wu-Tang Clan. He said, I need that bike, and I want to do a Wu-Tang bike. It was just like the right place, the right time on that one. And then something more high profile like The Simpsons. That was going and dealing with 20th Century Fox at the time. Now they're Disney, but that was dealing with 20th Century Fox, and that was a straight-up licensing deal where we were having to come up with projections and royalty numbers and minimum guaranteed payments. And that one was a little bit more one way where they're sending us assets and we have to get certain things approved. And it's like a licensing deal the same way you might buy a candy bar at the candy store that has a picture of your favorite cartoon character. That was like a straight licensing deal. We've done them in a number of different ways. There are licensing expos in Las Vegas and New York where you can go and find brands to partner with, but if you're just starting up, I think the best advice I could give is to try to find a company that is in a similar stage as you. It's going to be very difficult for a brand new brand to work with someone like Nike, for example, because they're a multi-billion-dollar company, but find someone in a similar stage as you and has a similar customer base and someone that you're not competing with but someone that you complement with and organically build that there. Saad, how often do customers come back and buy? Mehdi, we start seeing subsequent purchases on a typical average about 60 days afterward. And I'm not saying they're buying another bike, but they might come back and buy a new bar tape or change something up. It gives people an opportunity to change something up. But typically speaking, a customer of ours is close to making 4 purchases within a lifetime, which is great. That means someone is initially buying a bike, and they might be changing their tires, their wheels. Most of our parts are interchangeable, so even if they buy a black bike, let's say, and then 6 months or a year later we come out with their favorite sports team's bike color or whatever it may be, they can buy the frame and even get the part swapped out. Bikes keep their value pretty well too, especially when we're talking about limited things, so it's not uncommon for people to buy new parts, sell their old ones. I myself I'm always in that bucket. I'm always tinkering with all of my bikes. It very much is a fun project. As much as it is something that you ride, I think part of the fun is similar to tuning our cars, and there are other hobbies like this. Part of the fun is just tinkering, playing around with your bike, changing it up to customize your ride. Saad, any other apps that you use to help power the business? Mehdi, we use a series of bold apps for add-ons and product customization. I mentioned when a customer buys a bike, it's not the only thing they'll need. There's a lot of accessories and parts and upgrades and swaps that you can make. So we're using the product options from Bold. I think that one's probably like a staple in our quiver there. That's the main one. We'll have some kind of email pop up for more or had a better app usually running around holiday time or around certain promotion, so that's another one that's good. We've used ViralSweep for contest and promotions, so if you're running a giveaway, let's say you want to give away a bike, you can run email, signups there, but that app also people can get extra entries into your contest if they share it or follow your social media accounts, so if you want to drive more followers to your social media accounts. I really like ViralSweep. I think those are the big ones that we're using in terms of sales and marketing. Saad, what has been the biggest lesson that you've learned within running state bicycle, maybe within the last year, that you want to apply the lessons from this year? Mehdi, I think just being persistent is really critical. I mean, our industry last year was hit pretty hard. This is going back to late 18 and most of 2019. Our industry was hit pretty hard with the tariffs and the toll trade war. We were very persistent and resilient, and we were able to shift all of our production from China to Taiwan. Later on, we were able to petition the government and actually get a tariff exemption from the Trade Department, so our bikes were excluded from the tariffs. We were the first bike company to get that exemption, and the exemption was for our entire industry, not just for our company. That was a big win for us last year. I think a lot of people, your first instinct, when things get tough, is to abandon something or just accept something like, oh, we're going to be paying these tariffs, or this is going to be the way it's got to be. But we did everything in our power to make sure we could continue our business the way we wanted to run it, even though some of the things we did took a lot of bandwidth. The trade tariff was a complete long shot. We took the long shot and it panned out for us. Yeah, I think just persistence and being able to stick with things when times are tough. I am sure there's a lot of businesses that are weathering storms right now as I talk to you during this whole COVID pandemic. I think for those people that are listening, find a way to adapt, or make the best out of the situation, because persistence will ultimately pay off. Subscribe to Knowledge Builder.